In this video, we'll learn how to use the brush interface settings in Photoshop. We'll focus on these settings in the context of digital painting with the brush tool. But they're also important to know because many other tools in Photoshop use the exact same settings to draw or edit. For example, the brush interface is used when deleting pixels with the eraser tool, when making selections with the quick selection tool, when retouching photos with the clone stamp, and many others. I've got the exercise file collagetemplate.psd open, which will give us something to practice in. Let's select the brush tool from the toolbar by clicking on it or hitting B on the keyboard. It's a good idea when you're working with the brush tool to paint into a new blank layer. This keeps your brushstrokes separate from the rest of your image and makes editing easier. To make a new layer, I can click Layer, New Layer in the menu bar, or click the New Layer icon in the Layers panel. To paint with the brush tool, we simply click and drag to paint in the current layer. And the color of the brushstroke is determined by whatever color I've set in the foreground. I've also set a background color, which we'll use later. We'll cover exactly how to use the color picker to set your own colors in another video. We can set some of the basic properties of the brush tool using the brush preset picker. We can get there by clicking in the status bar on the icon that matches our brush cursor. Here we can adjust the size of our brush, which controls how wide and tall our brush strokes will be. We can also set the hardness, and that is how crisp or blurry the edge of the brush stroke is. We could also set the angle of the brush, as well as the roundness. So rather than a perfectly circular cursor, we could get something more like a fountain pen or a fan brush, for example. Further to the right in the status bar, we have a setting for opacity, where we can control how opaque or transparent our brushstrokes are. Below the size and hardness settings, we'll see shortcuts to recently used brush definitions. We can bring any of those up just by clicking. Below that is a more in-depth group of many different brush presets organized by folder. In the upper right corner of the brush preset picker, we can load in additional preset brushes by clicking the gear icon. I'll click on the Legacy Brushes option to load in some more and then click OK. This brings in a new folder of brushes that come along with Photoshop. You can also download and install custom brush sets from the Adobe site or elsewhere. If we find a group of brush customizations we'd like to save, we can create our own preset by clicking the icon below the gear that looks like a box with a plus sign in it. I can set some options, and when I finalize, I'll see it along with my folders of brushes. As you're working with the brush tool, there are some keyboard shortcuts that can help you work more quickly. For example, we can increase or decrease the size of the brush tip using the bracket keys. Those are to the right of the P key on your keyboard. Tapping the left bracket will reduce the diameter of the brush tip, and tapping the right bracket will increase it. We could also hold down Control Option in Mac or Control Alt in Windows on the keyboard while clicking and dragging the mouse. This lets us move our mouse up or down to adjust the hardness of the brush edge, or we can move our mouse left or right to adjust the diameter. Photoshop has many sophisticated options for digital painting with the brush tool. We can access some more advanced settings by clicking Window, Brush Settings in the menu bar. This lets us customize any of the built-in brushes from the Brushes panel or the Brush Preset Picker. Let's take our file back to its original state by clicking File, Revert in the menu bar, so we can practice with our brush settings. Now I'll go to the Brush Preset Picker and search our brushes for Rough Dry Brush, then click to make that the active brush. Now we'll look back at the Brush Settings panel, and we can see here there's lots of different settings in the left-hand column and detailed controls for each on the right. Let's pick Color Dynamics by clicking on it, and that enables color dynamics for this brush and shows us its specific settings. Like many of these brush settings, Color Dynamics lets us introduce jitter, which is randomness or variation, into a brush's settings. For example, the more I increase the slider for foreground-background jitter, the more Photoshop will randomly mix the foreground and background color as I paint. So you can see each time I click and drag, I get a different blend of foreground and background. Let's go ahead and dial that foreground background jitter back to 0. And we could also try to adjust the hue jitter. Now, every time I click with the brush tool, I'll get a different color. To reset any of our brush customizations, I can click on the Stack menu from the upper right corner of the Brush Settings panel and click Clear Brush Controls. Okay, that's an overview of using the brush interface settings in Photoshop, but we've only scratched the surface of what we can do with digital painting. Take some time to experiment with different brush settings and see what you can do.